So, why everyone's here? That's to hear what's going on in a amazingly challenging election year, the best way to say it. So whatever you thought 3 months ago probably isn't happening today, or if you did think 3 months ago what's happening today, you probably are a pretty good expert in what's going on. So we are thrilled that Patrick Murray is here today. Patrick Murray was named the founding director of the Monmouth University Polling Institute in 2005. In that short time, the Monmouth University poll has established itself as one of the nation's premier independent survey research centers, tracking public policy and quality of life issues nationally, as well as in his home state of New Jersey. In 2013, Patrick was the only pollster to predict the winning margins in both New Jersey's special U.S. Senate election and the gubernatorial race, leading the Asbury Park Press to call his polls freshly accurate. He's been on NBC, ABC, Fox News. It's a whole list of stuff here that I'm not going to go through because he'll take his time, and I'd rather he talk to us. So, Patrick, please come on up, and looking forward to hearing from you.
So talking a little bit about, before I talk about the presidential election, just want to talk a little bit about, polling in New Jersey and all sorts of things. I'm a New Jersey native, born and bred in Camden County, and a hotbed of odd politics. So yeah, Hudson County, Camden County, you pick one or the other, but not in a political family. Very much an independently minded family, and not one who ever bought into whatever the political line was coming out of either party. And that was always my approach as a pollster. When I became a pollster and gotten interested in politics, it wasn't because I was interested in political parties per se, but it was growing up in the entire American experience and how this was something that was unique in the history of the world. That this people-driven government, and the idea that we continue to be driven by people, but like, what do people actually really think when you talk to them, when you try to break through this? That was my approach when I started out. I actually left the state, then decided I wanted to be back here, came back to graduate school at Rutgers, and that's where I got my start. I was going to be a political science professor, ended up as a pollster, went to Rutgers, needed something to do. I was a graduate student, walked across the street to the Eagleton poll there and said, I need something to do. They said, sure, we got some work, and that was it. That's what I ended up doing. So spent over 10 years, about 10 years, at Eagleton and then the Blaustein School, doing a lot of public policy work, really being enmeshed in New Jersey. And then when Monmouth University decided to start its poll in 2005, they did a national search and then ended up hiring the guy who was 35 miles up the road. And my approach has always been to get information first about what everybody's saying before I actually go out into a poll and ask people about it. So here in New Jersey, I've developed a lot of contacts, both in Trenton, in the parties, the political leadership, and so forth. But my real source is sitting in diners and eavesdropping, because that's where people talk in real terms about what's going on and what bothers them. And I've actually written questions where I've gotten the phrasing for the questions from those conversations, right? Because this is how the public, this is how the political leaders talk about this, but not necessarily how the public talks about it. And if we're going to measure public opinion, we need to measure it in a way that actually reflects what the public is saying. And I think that approach has definitely set us apart. And people have taken notice that we do ask questions in a different angle. Sometimes in an angle which gets certain political leaders upset, but that's fine. Because that's our job, is to be the voice of the public. And sometimes the voice of the public is to call foul when you see a foul. So if we have a president of the United States who says that he could win a third term, immediately that says to me, well, you think so? Let's ask. Right? So we did that in a national poll. And it turns out he couldn't win a third term. And then we have a governor who's running for president who says that the reason why his job approval ratings are so low, or no, not just his job approval, the reason why people in New Jersey said that he wouldn't make a good president wasn't because they thought he would make a good president, because they really secretly wanted him to come back home. I see those things as a challenge. So in my very next poll in New Jersey, I asked the question, do you think Chris Christie would make a good president? The vast majority said no. And I said, so when you said that to me, our interviewers would said that. So when you said that, was it because you really, because you secretly want him, not secretly, but do you want him to come back to New Jersey and do his job as governor? Or do you really think he'd make a bad president? And guess what? Everybody said, no, it's because I really think he'd make a bad president. Yeah, that didn't win me too many friends there up in Mendham. But anyway, but that's been our approach. So we've taken that approach national at Monmouth University this year. So we looked at these things and have been caught out. As we said, Peter said, nobody saw this coming, what was going to happen in this presidential election. And I was among them. So we started polling on the presidential election in December. I was one of the first pollsters nationally who started including Donald Trump in polls. And others said, no way, this is just him again talking, he's not going to be part of it. And I said, probably not, but why not include him? We're already including 18 other potential Republican candidates. Throwing in another one is not going to upset the apple cart, right? So when he does announce in June of last year, I was one of those who said, this is going to be a blip on the radar screen. It's not going to last long. Look at his favorability ratings among Republican voters nationwide. They're horrible. And the difference between him and another candidate who doesn't have very good ratings is that the other candidate who doesn't have very good ratings is almost certainly not known by very many voters. So he or she has a chance to change that around. But Donald Trump, everybody knows who Donald Trump is. And if his numbers are upside down with very few people saying, I don't have an opinion of him, well, then you don't change those numbers. So he announces for president, says he's going to build the most beautiful wall you've ever seen, and within 2-3 weeks, his numbers flip. His favorability ratings flip. Have never, ever, ever seen anything like that in my life as a pollster. That I've only seen them flip when people don't know who the person is and they're getting to know them. Or if some major event happens, like a scandal or some heroic effort on the part of that person. But not somebody who's really well known, who simply announces for president, spouts off something about building a wall, and then suddenly you had a good quarter of Republicans who 3 weeks earlier said, no way, I don't like this Donald Trump guy, to saying he's the best thing for the country. And so I learned my lesson there of not to say anything about this is what's going to happen with Donald Trump. And I don't think, looking recently at what a lot of people in the media have been saying, particularly his recent comments about punishment for abortion or putting nuclear weapons in Asia and all these kinds of things, that the punditry is still saying, oh, well, this is really going to hurt him. And then what happened in Wisconsin the other night was, hold on a second, he was still getting 35% of the vote of women in the Republican primary there, which is pretty much what he was getting in the past 20-some primaries that we had seen before. And so the pundits are scratching their head, well, why didn't it hurt him among women? And I said the issue there was that 35% of Republican women who are voting in a primary represent about 10% of all women voters nationwide who are going to show up in November. They know what they're getting with Donald Trump. So what he said there wasn't upsetting them. Might hurt him with independent-minded women in November, but it's not going to hurt him among the people who are supporting him right now. That's why even though he lost in Wisconsin, he lost slightly among part of his base, which were men, to use his own terms, poorly educated white men. I think he's great. The best thing about Donald Trump is that I get to stand up and use these terms now, because now I'm just simply quoting Donald Trump, right? Although I won't quote everything that he's quoted. Yeah. So anyway, he did decently among them, but he lost them by a few points, and that was because Wisconsin was a different story entirely. That the punditry wasn't paying attention. They're paying to this national narrative that they're driving about his comments about abortion and nuclear weapons and whatever, and not what was going on in Wisconsin, which was talk radio in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is one of the most politically polarized states in the country. It's far right, a Tea Party. Conservatives and Eugene Deb socialists, and nobody in between, right? That's why Bernie Sanders won big. Ted Cruz won big because the talk radio circuit in Wisconsin had a concerted effort to support Ted Cruz and convince those people who happen to be those poorly educated white men who listen to talk radio, convinced enough of them, not most of them, just a small number of them, to swing over. Which is why he won. Which is why Ted Cruz was able to win big. If you look at Donald Trump's actual vote result, he still got over a third of the vote in Wisconsin. So it didn't dent him that much. It was just the anti-Trump movement was able to coalesce in Wisconsin in a way that I don't see going to happen in New York. We just released a New York poll yesterday, and Donald Trump is over 50% in New York. Ted Cruz is actually in third in New York. And we actually even asked that question about his comments about abortion and nuclear war, and vast majority of voters said, no, it doesn't have any impact on me whatsoever. Some quarter said it makes them less likely to support Trump, but they were going to not support Trump anyway. And what's interesting about what's going on in New York for Donald Trump is that 50% number is a magic number in New York. New York has 95 delegates. 14 are awarded to the statewide. Anybody who gets over 20% statewide, it's divided proportionally, but the remaining 81 delegates are awarded per congressional district, 27 congressional districts, 3 per district. The winner gets 2, the second place person gets 1 in each of those districts. In some of those districts, like in Manhattan, there are going to be fewer than 1,000 Republicans who actually show up to vote. And you still get 3 delegates. Now, if Donald Trump gets 50% plus 1 vote, of all the people who vote in that congressional district, he gets all 3 delegates in each congressional district. If he gets 50% plus 1 vote statewide, it doesn't matter how the other candidates do, he gets all 14 of those statewide delegates. So that 50% number is a magic number. Without the 50% number, if he just wins the state of New York, he probably gets about 70 delegates. With the 50% plus 1 number all across the state, he ends up with 95 delegates. So 1 vote is 25 delegates. The difference between getting 25 delegates. And this is why he can make up the difference between what happened in Wisconsin. And then the week after that, we have almost all of the rest of the Northeast except for New Jersey. And Donald Trump's going to do well there. And the reason why I bring this up is because we're still saying, okay, well, but these things won't play well with independents. And I've learned my lesson, as I said, is that I'm not predicting what Donald Trump's going to be able to do if he's the nominee in November.